Hello and welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. We are reviewing Bob Marley, One Love. Another film in that least favourite of my film genre categories, which is the rock music or music biopic. It's not a cradle to grave, though we do go up to the point of his death. I didn't realise how young he was. 36 years old when he died of cancer. This picks things up in 1976, and it focuses on that period of time between then through to 1981 when he died. His his peace protesting, using music as a means to kind of heal divisions, unite political factions, and what have you. So this is a film that's very much sort of focused on the last 5 years of his life, and it sort of takes little detours back in time to when he was a young boy, when he first meets Rita, his wife, and how they first met, and the conditions in which that happened, which is nice. And that's about as far back as we go to get a bit of the origin story. But this isn't one of those kind of cradle or birth through to death. And in fact, if I think about it, very few films are. If I think of the Judy Garland film, in fact, wasn't that focused only and solely on the last year or two of her life, or the period of time that she did a show in London? So I think it plays to its strengths that it does just focus on a slice of time in his life. Who's starring in it? So it's got Kingsley Ben-Adir in there. Kingsley Ben-Adir, I don't know Kingsley Ben-Adir from absolutely anything. When I look at photographs of him, I'll pop one up now, he's the least likely person you could imagine being able to look like Bob Marley. And of course, one of the problems I find with biopics also is, however much you don't want to go, I think what we do as film lovers is, well, they don't have to look just like them, but secretly they do. We kind of go, well, it's not all about them looking like them, it's about what no, they do. And you got, with Rami Malek and Freddie Mercury, he looked so like him, and Taron Egerton as Elton John, all that kind of. It does help. I mean, obviously it helps. You need a likeness. But I think you look at the photographs of Kingsley Ben-Adir, and you would be forgiven for thinking, Bob Marley, you're having a laugh. Anyway, so it stars him, and it stars Lashana Lynch principally as his wife, Rita, and they're kind of the two lead characters. We have all of Bob Marley's wailers, the entourage, we have all of his kind of musicians, but we also do have James Norton in there, who plays his agent, not his direct manager. His British-based agent is James Norton, who I have to confess, it's just James Norton. I mean, there's nothing to the role. It's possibly the most functional administrative role I think I've ever seen an actor given. I mean, yes, he's there, but he's literally there to kind of sign contracts and hold up album covers and book recording studios. I mean, it was curiously sort of unlayered kind of character. It's directed by Reinaldo Marcus Green, who is proven to be quite a capable pair of hands. He did King Richard, which obviously, Will Smith faithfully was nominated for an Oscar for, revolving around the Williams sisters. This film is doing incredibly well. Certainly at the box office in America, it's already hit 100 million. I think it's charting at around the same level in terms of what money it's made already. In just, I think 7 days it's been out. It's on a par with what Elvis, the Austin Butler film, made at a similar point. So this film is capturing people's imaginations. It's speaking to a lot of people. But is it any good? Let's unpack it. I think one thing that Ben-Adir does very well is he plays the stillness of Bob Marley brilliantly. Incredibly still, incredibly almost Buddhist-like, incredibly, not mannered, but incredibly sort of just low-key. I mean, even in the limited sort of stuff I've seen around Bob Marley, you realise he's not a frenetic character, he's not frantic, and it's a very still performance. And that's not an affectation. I think Ben-Adir does very well. And in fact, I actually would say from the front here, I think Kingsley Ben-Adir avails himself really well throughout this film. I think he, it must be such an enormous pressure to sort of realise such sort of legendary characters on the big screen. And I thought he played, I think he delivers quite an understated. I think he did the clever thing of underplaying it. That line that some actor was talking about somewhere the other day, where they said, don't act crying, try not to cry, and we will sort of feel your emotion because you're trying not to actually cry. He even underperforms Bob Marley's inherent lack of performance that was in his character, if you know what I mean. What I liked about the beginning of this, it was parked within the politics of Jamaica. Quite quickly, we're reminded that Bob Marley was shot, and his manager was shot. Took about 5 bullets for him too. So we get a sense of the violence, the politics. He's shot. He escapes the country, or he has to fly out of the country, and he goes to the UK. And as I say, we have these little flashbacks. We get a sense of his relationship and his marriage. So you get his connection with Rita, played by Lashana Lynch. And I have to say, Lashana Lynch, let's just give her an absolute shout out. For me, whilst Ben-Adir was, again, understated, very, very real, I think a very strong performance, Lashana Lynch was sensational. And she virtually had Well, she had very little script, actually, and she had very little to even interact or react to, because so much of her character and her role was about managing, essentially, the unreliability. I mean, obviously she's married to Bob Marley, and she's in his band. She's one of the backing singers. But, you know, he's unfaithful. He's a shit dad. He doesn't have much connection with the kids. He ends up having kids with someone else. None of that do we really get a sense of or see in the film. None of that is written into the film. There's no exposition around how shit he was as a husband or how shit he was as a dad. Nor was there really anything about the distress he might have felt from having to leave Jamaica and come to the UK. It didn't home in on that. Partly, possibly, could that be because, you know, the film was made with the support and is in fact produced by his son and some of his other sons, I believe, Ziggy Marley, which means of course they could access his remarkable back catalogue of music. But Lashana Lynch manages to inject into the various shots of her sort of a simmering poise. She has to carry a lot. She's a wounded soldier. She's brave. She's persistent. She has poise. She has dignity. She's there throughout, you know, and she has a certain sort of spiritual stamina, which I think she brought to the role and the script didn't give her. And I'd be curious to know whether that was something that the director and her really worked on delivering in the film without it being obviously written on the page. Because I think you've got this situation where if it was written obviously on the page, you know, perhaps someone, family, estate, might have got a bit funny about that. So it is a film that sidesteps all of that. And that speaks to the problem I have with all sort of music biopics, is the extent to which they mollycoddle the subject and they go for all the obvious bits, and then they might choose a few sort of bad bits of their lives that aren't really that bad but can be tied up with a neat bow and made to seem a little bit better than they were. So he's all about peace. He's all about peace, man. He's all about, you know, this is another great detail in this film is from the get-go, you may struggle to kind of bed into the patois, the Jamaican patois, the Jamaican, the English, the accents. I loved it because it was so authentic, it was so strong, it was real, they didn't do that thing which I understand, is it Cool Running, that film where, you know, they didn't try and anglicise it, and for me it was real. I mean, I grew up in Ladbroke Grove, and it felt very reminiscent of just the sound that you heard, you know, and you understand it, you get used to it after a while. So, you know, it does require a little bit of attention, but I think, you know, there's a little bit of struggle there, but I think that adds to the authenticity. I think that was one other aspect about the film which I'm really pleased the director, you know, protected, and they insisted on having an authentic kind of accent, language, patois, whatever you want to call it. But here's the big but. Where this film doesn't work is it does fall foul of that terrible thing that these biopics do, which is when they've got access to such a remarkable back catalogue. And the thing I would have to say is, my God, one thing this film does do, and really you could argue this is the point of all these films, isn't it? It's an opportunity to remind us of just how vast and how brilliant the music and the hits and the tracks and how memorable they were. It's a real opportunity. You know, you're hit, boom, 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 one after the other with these sensational numbers that really do make you go, oh God, I must have another listen to them. And I think Bob Marley actually, as a kind of musician and as an artist and as a mythological kind of figure, if you like, does fall foul of what I call the kind of chocolate box syndrome. Like, you know, no one likes Monet because they've seen him on the front of a chocolate box. We all think we know what Bob Marley is because he's always put him on the background at a certain age and a certain era for a certain type of mood, but no one really listens to it. And I think this film does quite a good job of reminding us that so many of these tracks were born out of circumstance, they were born out of politics, they were born out of a genuine belief. And I think that's really nice about this film, is that he was a genuinely peaceful person. What I would have been interested in, though, a bit more is, it speaks a little bit to that idea of in the 70s, all men were you're up for kind of, you know, free loving and all peace and hippie and all that kind of stuff. Well, it suits men, doesn't it? Because having sex with loads of people. Does it suit women as much? Maybe some, but not necessarily all. This might have worked for him. He might have been of all peace loving and everything else. But at what cost? You know, how did that impact on his kids? How was it impacting on Lashana? How did it impact on the artists around him? You know, it doesn't go to the more difficult aspects of what any portrait of Bob Marley, you know, should be looking at or could be interested in, or I'd like it to be interested in. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to ruin the myth of the guy. You know, he still stays strong. So, he's into peace, he's peace and love and all this kind of stuff, but we do have lots and lots of eggy scenes where you feel the exposition and the explanation of how a tune came to be. You know, I mean, a classic example in the film is Exodus. You know, he's upstairs, he hears the soundtrack from the film Exodus, they play a tune, then they come in, then one starts a sort of melody on the guitar, then someone else hits a sort of, you know, a percussion instrument, and then it starts to come together, and you're like, yeah, wow, this is cool. We're in the foothills of this tune coming together. But it's so neat, and there were moments like that in Bohemian Rhapsody where you just think, this is so eggy. This is like Toy Town telly or just filmed by numbers. And I think those moments are always a bit, because of course there is something interesting to be said about how the story or how the song came about, or what its origin was. But does it have to happen every time with a sort of circular jam of musicians, with someone trying something and going, oh no, let me try this, and suddenly they've got it? I did like, there was a moment in the middle of his time in London where is it the Clash? I always remember my mum, Nanny Di's record collection it was a curious mishmash of genres. She had reggae, Peter Tosh, Yellow Man. She even had the dub stuff of Sly and Robbie, Bob Marley. And then there was also all this punk stuff, mad scatological punk. And I'd be like, fucking hell, these two don't talk to each other. And I thought it was really neat, actually, in the 70s in London to see him at a club. And apparently somewhere he has said that he saw punks as the sort of outcasts, much in the same way as Rastafarians are in certain cultures too. You know what, I could have even perhaps done with a little bit more about the whole Rastafarianism thing. I mean, it's very there, and you very much feel it's there, but I could have done with a bit more. I mean, and you have got this guy who ages in the film, great character, who's almost this sort of soothsayer. He's this preacher. He's this kind of, he's like a, on the island in Jamaica, he kind of sees things. He's a spiritual, and he can connect, and he makes connections. I could have done with a bit more of that, actually. I wouldn't have minded going into that and a bit more of a kind of, whoa, let's get down with what the politics are here. It wasn't a particularly strong script. It didn't take us into any of the kind of deeper reservoirs, the dark chambers or the not dark chambers, or just the kind of even like Buddhist, Rastafarian sort of chambers of thought or spirituality. It nibbled at the edges. So it didn't end up really giving us anything. It didn't even really, for me, if it had given us a stronger sense of the politics of Jamaica, as in what was at stake, who had he aggravated more, you get a sense that there's a gang, you get a sense of it. But I found myself thinking, if maybe give me a bit more about that, because I'm thinking of Bob Marley as not a freedom fighter, but using music in that way would be a really neat sort of development of the idea of what he was about, what drove him, what motivated him. One can't help but wonder, I mean, I am left wondering by the end of it all, whether he just happened to be lucky and managed to, make a successful creative life, albeit short, of kind of chilling out and saying it was all for peace, love and rock and roll or reggae. And actually, was he that interested in the politics? Was he actually that interested in rescuing a side? Or did he have an alliance or an allegiance to anyone? Or was he more interested, unfortunately, possibly, in the whole kind of all the trappings and trimmings of the musician's lifestyle on the road and all that kind of stuff? You would think that maybe he was. There was one moment where him and Lashana Lynch are there in Paris. There's somewhere where there's a bit of conflict and you feel something. I mean, again, as I say, she brings so much to her sort of simmering silences and looks, and a very powerful moment where they're on stage together and she's singing and he's kind of trying to say, I don't know if he's asking her to forgive him, but he kind of is, but he puts his hand on her shoulder. Now, it's a bit more sinister than actually, it was quite controlling, which it would have been. So I could have done with a bit more of that, and I could have even done with a bit more about actually, what would have this been like for his kids? And of course, his kids are producing the film. They're not wanting to rubbish the legend that is Bob Marley. It made me realise that actually with these films, when they hesitate around giving us the sort of real, unedited, unflinching truth around whoever it is, a man, woman, Whitney, Amy Winehouse, Judy Garland, Freddie Mercury, in giving us, or potentially maybe if they tried to give us a much more raw, real, jagged, unflinching portrait, I think the legend would become stronger. I think this would make the mythos, this would make their mythological status and what they achieved more real and more sort of readily kind of get on boardable with for newer generations. It would be like, okay, well, he was a genius, and okay, he fucked up here and he fucked up there. He was of his time. He made this mistake, and he was okay. I don't think it necessarily takes away from the artist. Touch that stuff, which I think the Amy documentary does, and they become more beguiling. In fact, I all got a bit toe curlingly, literally, kind of when we discovered that he had cancer under his toenail. I immediately started trying to pull my toenail off. That was all awful, and of course, that was the first sign that he had cancer. In essence, in summary, I came out of this pleasantly surprised by two things. I thought Kingsley Ben-Adir was much, much, much more powerful and successful at portraying Bob Marley than I thought he was going to be. It would have been very easy to tip into an overperformed, chilled, sometimes stoned, peace-loving, kind of hippie, kind of yeah. And he wasn't. He was those things at times, but he was also engaged. He was also plugged in. I could have done with a little bit more around the fact that, for instance, I know that in the real life story of Bob Marley, he had a white father, and apparently, by all accounts, his mother, Bob Marley's mother, would make him sleep under the table or somewhere else away from his other sort of half siblings. So he was marked as different, and there's a passing reference to it. I would have been interested to have a few moments around that. I wanted a few more moments of non-music origin. I wanted a few moments where we weren't sort of like, giving us the origin story of this tune. I kept feeling like I was almost getting to a really deeper truth, and then the script just took us to another kind of functional music biopic device, and then it just kind of fell apart. And the fact that I thought was very nifty and very clever that they honed in on this slice of time at the end of his life, from the shooting, if you like, to his death. They kind of squandered even the cleverness of homing in on that moment, because we didn't really get enough of the detail around the politics, nor him having to leave Jamaica and be in England, and the dispersal of family and all that kind of stuff. We got no sense of the impact of that on him. We just saw him playing football and having fun. I've been haunted with Lashana Lynch's face, actually, throughout this. Her incredibly sad but regal and dignified face, both when she was in real life watching what was going on around her, but also most sort of movingly when she was standing behind him singing. There was a kind of, not zombification, she was kind of moving through the motions. There was a dislocation in her, a sacrifice. And I just found that really interesting. And again, you wonder sometimes, are these stories better told? I mean, I think they tried to do that with the Priscilla film. Are these stories of these big characters better told, perhaps, from a different vantage point in, or from a different access point? Maybe we should be telling Rita Marley's story. Maybe that's the way. But you won't get all the music clearance, presumably. So maybe that's the way in. Maybe they should do a Rita Marley film like they did a Priscilla film for Elvis. So what would I score it? I'd give it probably 56 out of 100. But tell me what you think. Did you enjoy it?